What's up, guys? Welcome to Why Go Friends English. Today, we're going to talk about some pretty costly mistakes that language tutors make.
Yeah, we've had plenty of teachers and instructors and tutors over the years to try to learn Mandarin or some other languages, and we saw kind of some common threads that language tutors and teachers would make when they would teach their students, including us sometimes.
Yeah.
And the goal of this video is to instruct you guys, if you're language tutors, but also if you're language students, to figure out a better way that you can communicate so you can make the most of your time and money in those tutoring sessions.
Yeah. And this is also helpful for you as a parent if you are looking to hire a tutor for your kids, or you're trying to hire a tutor for your spouse and you're just wondering what to look for. Well, these are some things that you can avoid, or things that are going to let you know that things are probably not going so well. And we really highly recommend that you communicate with the tutor first, not just, turn and burn.
Yeah. And the point here is not to bash. It's not to tear down or to bash teachers or students, but it's to try to learn from some mistakes. So the first one is the teaching speed. So sometimes teachers either teach too fast or they teach too slow. Both of these extremes can be really difficult for students to learn.
Right. From this tutor side, it often looks like you've been through the same path before, or you've had a student that struggled with similar problems before, so you're like, I know how to help you. And so what happens is you do too much too fast, or you really are overconfident in how much the student can handle at that time. There's a lot of different things with the tutors on the tutor side where they just don't know.
Yeah.
And they don't know your situation. They don't want to stress you out. Really, they genuinely want to help, but they feel like, I have to give you all this stuff to make you feel like you're getting your money's worth and to help you grow as fast as you really want to. But really, what needs to happen here is just some communication to say, hey, that's too fast, or we're moving on before I've really mastered something, and I really need to just slow down a little bit.
Yeah. Another thing about the speed of teaching is that it's really difficult for the tutor to actually know the speed that is required from the student. So it's hard to express that as a student, but it's also hard for the tutor to know. So it's really easy for us to kind of, just like you were saying, just keep going full steam ahead when really the student needs to back up a little bit, and that's not communicated. That can be really detrimental to the tutoring session.
Right. Or sometimes we just teach too slow. We keep hitting the same thing over and over again because we're not seeing the results that need to happen before moving on to the next thing, because we know what the next thing is going to be and how much they need to have a strong foundation in the basics. But that gets very frustrating. Often with parents is what we've had the most trouble with that on the tutor side. And I understand that because you're like, they've got to graduate or they've got to pass this test. This test is coming up and I need my kid to be caught up. You're still on the basics, but it's like really those basics are the foundation. And I get it. That's really difficult to balance and to communicate. And that's just something that you just have to communicate with and work through slowly and just hear the tutor out. Because if they've taught a lot before, then they know what they're doing. They're just not seeing a specific result that they're looking for before moving on.
Yeah. The next problem that we see some language tutors make is that they may be good at the language, but they're not necessarily skilled to teach the language.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of Chinese tutors who tried to teach us Chinese, and it was good in one sense because they were a native speaker. They didn't learn Chinese from a foreigner. They learned Chinese as their mother tongue. But just because they know Chinese doesn't necessarily mean they can teach Chinese very well.
Right. Maybe they just haven't learned teaching theory yet. Maybe they've learned a language from a book, but they're not accustomed to teaching cross-culturally. That was our main problem, is these tutors would come and they'd set down a book and they'd be like, this is how we're going to do it, and just really go back to the way they learned language in primary school or in middle school.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work very well because what we needed was survival Mandarin.
Right.
Initially at first, we needed to learn how to function in country. But that was a different struggle, and that took communication on our side first.
It's kind of like if an American took their English class and tried to replicate that in another culture setting.
Yeah.
So they take their grammar books, they take those resources, and then they give it to a national. But the problem is that's way too far above their skill level, and it may just not be very entertaining or grabbing the attention of the student, so it's counterproductive.
Yeah, I remember sometimes in these sessions I would learn really great grammar rules, but then I couldn't use them right away because I didn't have the words to use the patterns.
Right.
And that was really frustrating early on. Or learning standard Mandarin when everybody else spoke a different language around, like a normal local language around. So I was just like, man, wasn't able to use it right away, and that was difficult there at first until we were able to communicate, and it got much better after that.
So the next one is more of a broad discussion of teaching styles in general, because there are two broad ranges of teaching styles, which is more micromanaging, where I'm going to plan out every step of the way of the journey for my students, versus the other side, which is more of a loosey-goosey kind of free kind of teaching, where they kind of figure things out as they go, and it's okay to make mistakes and stuff like that. Those are two extremes, and in language tutors, we can sometimes see those extremes pan out. We've had tutors be very strict on, you're going to go through these problems and say these sentences, and it's going to be like this, and those can be exhausting. But likewise, a really loosey-goosey free teacher we're going to feel like we didn't learn that much because it was mainly just practice and not much instruction.
Right. So there's definitely two sides, and there's definitely a balance. There are some things that you should memorize, but most things about language, I feel like you really shouldn't memorize. It's not that helpful if you memorize anyway, because you'll just forget as soon as you quit practicing. So loosey-goosey is a great term there. Definitely not standard English.
Laid back. That's the
laid
word.
Back.
Laid back.
Loosey-goosey is something we say all the time, referring to either physically loosening something or just really laid back, lax, no planning ahead type of style of teaching.
The fourth mistake that we sometimes see in language tutors is that they're not really experienced with second language acquisition.
Yeah, so they've perhaps not learned a language before, so they don't understand where the student is just trying to make sense of things in another language, or just they haven't walked through that process of how difficult and how frustrating it can be, how slow it can be. They're not used to the ups and downs emotionally of, man, I learned so much today. This is awesome. I'm going to learn English forever. But then other people, they also don't know what it's like to just hit this crash point of like, I haven't learned anything in a month, and I have lost motivation to study, or I've just plateaued and I feel like I'm not learning anything. I feel like I'm just spinning tires here. Another phrase for you. When somebody doesn't know what that's like, it's really difficult to walk alongside someone in that situation. It doesn't mean you can't, but it's definitely, there is this lack of understanding, so there has to be more communication between the student and the tutor to help them figure it out. But definitely finding a tutor who's been through language learning before is invaluable for language learning.
Again, using maybe my family as an example, they haven't really learned another language, and so they could speak perfect native English, but if you tried to get them to teach you English, it would be really hard for them to empathize with the sheer amount of vocabulary and grammar and nuances that comes with language learning. So you got to be careful, because as a student and as a teacher, it can be really difficult. Yeah,
it's really easy to make plans and to coach someone through something, but if you haven't been through it yourself, you don't really know what you're putting them through. So you definitely, as a language tutor, but also as one who studies language, you really want to find somebody who knows what that's like.
The last one that we're going to talk about today is something that's a little bit more personal to our language journey, which is as ESL teachers in China, we struggled in the tutoring sessions with kind of like a language power struggle. So we were trying to learn Chinese, but because the people that we were studying from, their English was actually a lot better than our Chinese, they would sometimes shift the language that they're teaching into English to try to teach us Chinese, which would kind of shift the whole balance into an English realm, not a Chinese realm, which was just really hard for us.
Yeah, it would have been probably more helpful to try to explain things in Chinese, and when we are absolutely stuck and have no idea, then use a little bit of English to help explain. But in these cases, it was very difficult, because oftentimes what would happen is we would get stuck talking about just the same concept over and over, which was fine because we were really asking questions and trying to understand that concept, but it was entirely in English by that point. So we really weren't getting into understanding. We were understanding more about the mechanics of Mandarin, but we were not actually practicing it, and definitely not listening, which was very costly to us.
Yeah,
So.
and honestly, a lot of those situations, that information that we wanted to learn was honestly probably a little too far ahead of us.
Yeah.
But the same situation can happen even in another kind of setting where you're trying to learn English.
You're trying to trade language time.
Right. So if you know Spanish and the other person knows English and you're trying to trade language tutoring sessions, it's going to be extremely difficult because, like they said, that there's a language power struggle.
Yeah, maybe you should just take a timer and say there will be exactly this much time, and when it goes off, we're switching languages. That would have been wise.
Yeah, something like that.
All right, so that's it for this one. That was 5 language things that really held us up and were very costly to us when we were beginning learning Mandarin. Later this week, we're going to turn on a video of things that were really good from really awesome tutors. So that way, hopefully you, as a student, know exactly what to look out for in a tutor, but that you would also know what to communicate with. So when you see some of these mistakes happening or you see some great things happening, you can communicate that pretty well with your tutor.
Yeah, and again, the purpose of this video is not to bash those teachers, because honestly, we make those same mistakes too.
Absolutely.
All the time. But the purpose of this video is so that we all can be better informed, so that we can try to make the most of those times that we spend with our tutors in language teaching, and so that we might be able to use that time better and more efficiently.
And as far as Americans go, it is totally fine for you to say, hey, tutor, hand up, you were going way too fast for me, or I don't feel like I've mastered this yet, or you are going way too slow. What gives?
Yeah.
Why? That's totally fine in our culture to say, teacher, hey, there's a problem here, or I'm not learning something from this. That is not rude at all. It is great for you to do that. Now, you don't want to come up and be like really ugly to them, of course, but you definitely want to say, excuse me, but hey, I'm sorry, but this is way too fast for me. Do you mind slowing down, or something like that?
So that's it. Check out our next video where we're going to talk about our 5 best language tutors. And we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.